The desert stretched endlessly under the merciless Arizona sun, its golden dust shimmering like liquid fire in the afternoon heat. 24-year-old Aiyana moved through this hostile landscape with the fluid grace of someone born to it, his weathered moccasins leaving barely a whisper against the hard-packed earth. His copper skin gleamed with perspiration, but his dark eyes remained sharp and alert, scanning the horizon with the instincts passed down through generations of Apache warriors. Beside him, Shadow, part wolf, part dog, all loyalty, suddenly froze mid-step. The magnificent creature's ears pricked forward, his silver-gray coat bristling as his nostrils flared, catching something on the wind that human senses couldn't detect. "What is it, old friend?" Aiyana's voice was barely above a whisper, his hand instinctively moving to the bone-handled knife at his side. In this land, danger could strike as swiftly as a rattlesnake's fang. Shadow's amber eyes locked onto a cluster of rocks about 200 yards ahead, near what remained of an ancient creek bed long since claimed by drought. The dog's low whine carried an urgency that made Aiyana's pulse quicken. In their 5 years together, since he'd found Shadow as an abandoned pup, the animal had never led him astray. They approached cautiously, Aiyana's trained eyes reading the story written in the disturbed sand. Wagon wheel tracks, now partially obscured by wind, led toward the rocks before simply stopping. No continuation, no turnaround marks, just emptiness, as if the desert had simply swallowed whatever had been there. Shadow whined again, more insistently now, and bounded ahead despite Aiyana's sharp whistle to wait. That's when Aiyana saw her. She was crumpled behind a large boulder like a broken doll, her pale skin burned red by the sun, lips cracked and bleeding, her dark hair, once probably neatly arranged, now hung in matted tangles around a face that told a story of unimaginable suffering. Her dress, once fine fabric, now torn and stained, suggested she wasn't from these parts. But what stopped Aiyana cold wasn't her obvious distress. It was the bundle she clutched protectively against her chest, even in unconsciousness, a baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, wrapped in what had once been a white blanket, but was now grey with dust and stained with Aiyana's stomach clenched. Blood. Fresh blood. He dropped to his knees beside them, his fingers seeking a pulse at the woman's throat. Weak, but there. The baby stirred at his touch, letting out a thin, desperate cry that seemed to echo off the rocks like an accusation against the merciless sky. "By the spirits," Aiyana breathed, his voice heavy with something between wonder and dread. "What happened to you?" Shadow circled them anxiously, his keen nose picking up scents that painted a picture of terror and flight. The dog's behavior suggested they weren't alone out here, or hadn't been recently. Someone or something had driven this woman to flee into the desert with her child. As if summoned by his thoughts, the woman's eyelids fluttered. Her eyes, when they opened, were the most striking green Aiyana had ever seen, like the color of rare desert springs after a storm. But they were filled with such raw terror that he instinctively placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Don't move," he said gently, though he wasn't sure she could understand Apache. "You're safe now." She tried to speak, but only managed a cracked whisper. "Please, they're coming." Her eyes rolled back, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. But her arms never loosened their protective grip on the child. Aiyana looked around the empty desert, seeing nothing but endless vista in every direction. Who was coming? Why would anyone chase a woman with a baby into this hell on earth? As he gently lifted both woman and child, surprised by how light she felt, as if the desert had already begun claiming her substance. Shadow suddenly went rigid. The dog's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Following the animal's line of sight, Aiyana spotted them, 3 dark specks moving across the desert floor, still miles away but definitely heading in their direction. Rider, and from their determined approach, they weren't coming to help. His mind raced. The nearest water source was his hidden camp, about 3 miles northeast. The woman needed water desperately, and the baby's cries were growing weaker, never a good sign. But carrying them both would slow him down significantly. The riders were closing the distance. Shadow looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes, as if asking what they were going to do. It was a question that would haunt Aiyana for the rest of his life, because the choice he made in that moment, to save two strangers at great risk to himself, would set in motion events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about right and wrong, about family and sacrifice, about love that transcends every boundary humans create. "Come on, boy," he whispered, adjusting his grip on the unconscious woman and her child. "We run." As they disappeared into the maze of rocks and hidden passages that only someone raised in this desert could navigate, the baby's cries seemed to carry a message on the wind, a message that spoke of secrets buried in dust, of sins that cast long shadows, and of a truth so shocking that it would transform three lives in ways none of them could possibly imagine. The desert, witness to countless stories of survival and loss, settled into watchful silence. But for the first time in years, Shadow looked back as they ran, as if he somehow knew that what they were leaving behind was just as important as what lay ahead. And in the distance the three riders pressed on, their intentions as dark as the shadows they cast against the unforgiving sand. Aiyana's hidden camp nestled in a natural canyon, invisible from any direction unless you knew exactly where to look. Ancient Apache wisdom had chosen this spot, where underground springs fed a small pool of precious water, and overhanging rocks provided shelter from both sun and prying eyes. It had been his grandfather's sanctuary, and his grandfather's before that. He laid the unconscious woman on a bed of soft animal hides, the baby still clutched in her arms. Shadow immediately positioned himself at the canyon entrance, a four-legged sentinel whose keen senses would detect any approaching danger long before human ears could pick up the sound. The baby's cries had grown alarmingly weak during their 3-mile journey. Aiyana had carried infants before. Apache children were raised by the entire community, but this pale, fragile creature seemed so different from the robust babies he knew. Its tiny fingers moved feebly, searching for something it couldn't find. "Hungry," he murmured, understanding immediately. But this presented a problem that made his chest tight with worry. The child needed its mother's milk, but the woman remained deep in unconsciousness, her breathing shallow and labored. Working quickly, Aiyana mixed water with ground acorn meal, a traditional Apache remedy for nursing mothers who couldn't feed their children. It wasn't ideal, but it might keep the infant alive long enough for the mother to recover. Using a piece of clean cloth, he managed to coax a few drops of the mixture into the baby's mouth. The infant's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Tiny hands grasped desperately at the cloth, small sounds of relief escaping between hungry swallows. The baby had been starving. "How long were you out there?" Aiyana wondered aloud, turning his attention to the woman. Her condition was worse than he'd initially realized. Besides severe dehydration and sun exposure, there were other injuries: a purple bruise along her left cheekbone, finger-shaped marks around her wrists, and what looked like rope burns on her ankles. Someone had hurt this woman before she'd fled into the desert. As he gently cleaned her wounds with cool spring water, she began to stir again. This time, when her green eyes opened, they focused on him with startling clarity. "My baby," were her first words, spoken in accented English. Her voice was hoarse, but there was steel beneath the fragility. "Safe," Aiyana replied in his carefully learned English, gesturing to the infant now sleeping peacefully beside her. "You both safe now?" Relief flooded her features, but it was quickly replaced by that same terror he'd seen earlier. She tried to sit up too quickly and immediately swayed, forcing Aiyana to steady her with gentle hands. "Easy," he said. "You very sick. Need rest, need water." "No, you don't, Aunt," she whispered urgently, her fingers clutching at his shirt. "They'll find us. They won't stop looking." "Oh God, what have I done?" "Who?" Aiyana asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The men following you." Her eyes widened in shock. "You saw them, 3 riders. Still far away, but coming." He studied her face carefully. "Who are they? Why they hunt you?" For a long moment, she said nothing, her gaze moving between his face and the sleeping baby. Whatever internal battle she was fighting played out in the subtle expressions that crossed her features: fear, shame, determination, and finally a kind of desperate resignation. "My name is Catherine," she said finally. "Catherine Morrison." And this, she looked down at the baby with such fierce love that it made Aiyana's throat tight. "This is Sarah, my daughter. I am Aiyana," he replied. "This my companion, Shadow." He gestured toward the canyon entrance, where the dog maintained his vigilant watch. "You tell me why men hunt you. Maybe I help." Catherine's laugh held no humor, only bitter irony. "Help? You don't know what you're asking, what you've already gotten yourself into just by saving us." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, tears had gathered there. "Those men, one of them is my husband." The words hung in the desert air like a physical thing, heavy with implications that made Aiyana's pulse quicken. A husband hunting his wife and child through the desert spoke of things darker than simple marital discord. "He hurt you," Aiyana said. "It wasn't a question." "For 2 years," she whispered, "ever since Sarah was born. He changed, became something I didn't recognize. The drinking, the gambling debts, the rage." She touched the bruise on her cheek unconsciously. "I told myself it would get better, that he would get better." But then he started looking at Sarah differently. Aiyana's blood ran cold. He'd heard such stories before during trading visits to settlements where white men's laws held sway. Stories of fathers who saw their own children as property to be sold, used, discarded. The Apache way of protecting children, where the entire tribe would die before allowing harm to come to the young ones, seemed like a distant dream in comparison. "So you ran," he said. "I ran," she confirmed, "in the middle of the night, with nothing but the clothes on our backs. I thought if I could just get far enough away, find somewhere he'd never look." Her voice broke. "But I got lost. The wagon broke down. We ran out of water. I was ready to die, but Sarah, innocent little Sarah, didn't deserve to pay for my mistake." Shadow's low growl from the canyon entrance interrupted her story. Both of them froze, listening to the desert's sudden silence. Even the insects had stopped their chirping. "They're close," Aiyana whispered, moving swiftly to gather his weapons, a rifle, his bow and arrows, and the knife that had belonged to his father. Catherine struggled to sit up, clutching Sarah to her chest. "You have to leave us," she said desperately. "Take your dog and go. Don't let my problems become yours. I won't have your blood on my hands too." Aiyana stared at her for a long moment, seeing not just the fear in her eyes, but the courage it had taken to flee with her child into the unknown desert. The love that had driven her to risk everything for a daughter's safety. The strength that kept her fighting even when death seemed certain. "Apache way," he said quietly. "Children sacred. All children. We protect what is sacred." Before she could protest further, he was moving toward the canyon entrance, checking his rifle's load. Shadow looked back at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Aiyana saw his own determination reflected there. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. But as the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, growing steadily louder, Aiyana couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine hadn't told him everything. There was something more in her eyes, a secret deeper than an abusive marriage, darker than a desperate flight into the wilderness. Something that would make the confrontation ahead far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. The baby stirred in Catherine's arms, letting out a soft cry that seemed to echo like a prayer in the sacred space of the hidden canyon. And for the first time since he'd found them, Aiyana wondered if his mercy would become their doom. The hoofbeats stopped just outside the canyon's hidden entrance. Aiyana pressed himself against the rock wall, rifle ready, while Shadow crouched low beside him, every muscle coiled like a spring. From deeper in the canyon he could hear Catherine's whispered prayers and Sarah's soft whimpering. "Catherine," the voice that boomed off the canyon walls was rough with whiskey and rage. "I know you're in there, you worthless whore. Come out now, and I might let you live." Aiyana's jaw clenched at the crude word. Even without understanding all the English, The hatred in the man's tone was unmistakable. This was a voice accustomed to inflicting pain. "She ain't answering, boss," came a second voice, younger and nervous. "Maybe she ain't here." "She's here," the first man snarled. "That half-breed tracker of mine don't make mistakes," said the tracks led right to this godforsaken hole. A third voice, cold and calculating, "Could be a trap. Indians are tricky." Aiyana's blood chilled. A track. That explained how they'd followed the trail so precisely despite his efforts to cover their path. Someone who knew the desert almost as well as he did. "Catherine," the husband's voice again, closer now. "You think you can hide from me? You think you can take my daughter and run off like some common thief? Get out here now, or I'll come in shooting." From behind him, Aiyana heard Catherine's sharp intake of breath. When he glanced back, her face was pale as moonlight, her arms wrapped protectively around Sarah. "He means it," she whispered. "Robert, when he's been drinking, he's capable of anything." The baby chose that moment to cry, a thin, piercing sound that seemed to cut through the canyon walls like a knife. The silence that followed was deafening. "Well, well," came Robert Morrison's voice, thick with cruel satisfaction. "Sounds like little Sarah's hungry. You better come out now, Catherine, before something terrible happens to our precious daughter." The threat was unmistakable, and it ignited something primal in Aiyana's chest. He'd heard enough. Moving with the fluid silence of his ancestors, he slipped toward the canyon entrance, shadow matching his movements step for step. He could see them now, 3 men on horseback, silhouetted against the bright desert beyond. The one in the center, Robert Morrison, was a large man gone soft around the middle, with the florid face of a heavy drinker. His clothes had once been fine but were now stained with sweat and trail dust. The gun in his hand shook slightly, whether from drink or rage. Aiyana couldn't tell. To his right sat a younger man, barely out of his teens, with the nervous energy of someone in over his head. But it was the third man who made Aiyana's heart skip a beat. The tracker was Apache. Not just Apache, Aiyana recognized him. Nalnesh, whose name meant he who works. They'd grown up in the same band before Nalnesh had been seduced by the white man's gold and turned his back on his people. Now he wore white man's clothes and served white man's interests, even when those interests meant hunting down innocent women and children. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. "I know you're watching, Shadow Warrior," Nalnesh called out in Apache, his voice carrying easily through the rocks. "Come out. This doesn't have to end in blood." Aiyana stepped into view, his rifle trained on Robert Morris. "It already has," he replied in the same language, then switched to English. "Leave now, woman and child, under my protection." Morrison's laugh was ugly and raw. "Your protection? Boy, do you have any idea who you're messing with? I'm Robert Morrison. I own half the territory between here and Tucson. That woman stole my property, and I'm taking it back." "Property?" Aiyana's voice was dangerously quiet. "My wife, my daughter, my business." Morrison's bloodshot eyes gleamed with malice. "See, Catherine didn't just run away from a loving husband. She ran away with something that belongs to me. Something worth a lot of money to certain interested parties." Behind him, Aiyana heard Catherine's sharp gasp of denial, but something in her tone suggested Morrison wasn't entirely lying. "What you talking about?" Aiyana demanded, though part of him dreaded the answer. Morrison's grin was wolfish. "Oh, she didn't tell you. My dear wife has been skimming from my business accounts for months. Took nearly $5,000 when she ran. But that's not the best part." His voice dropped to a cruel whisper. "The best part is what she was planning to do with little Sarah here." "Robert, no." Catherine's voice cracked like a whip from deeper in the canyon. "Don't you dare. Tell him, Catherine." Morrison shouted back. "Tell your Apache friend what you really are. Tell him about the nice couple in California who were willing to pay top dollar for a healthy white baby. Tell him how you were planning to sell our daughter to buy yourself a new life." The words hit Aiyana like physical blows. He turned to stare back into the canyon, seeing Catherine's face crumple with shame and anguish. Sarah continued to cry in her arms, innocent of the storm of accusations swirling around her. "It's It's not what it sounds like, Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was desperate. He was going to hurt her, or worse. I thought if I could get her somewhere safe, somewhere he'd never find her. By selling her? Aiyana's voice was hollow. To a good family, people who would love her and protect her. It wasn't about the money. Liar, Morrison roared. You wrote the letters, Catherine. I found them all. You were going to take their money and disappear, leaving Sarah with strangers. The baby's cries grew more distressed, as if she could sense the emotional turmoil surrounding her. Shadow whined softly, pressing against Aiyana's leg as if trying to offer comfort in the face of revelations that changed everything. Nalnish spoke up, his voice carefully neutral. The woman is a thief and a child seller, shadow warrior. This is white man's justice. Step aside and let it be done. But Aiyana was looking at Catherine, really looking at her. Beyond the shame and desperation, he saw something else. The fierce way she held Sarah, the protective curve of her body around the infant, the raw love in her eyes when she looked at her daughter. You change your mind, he said quietly, about selling her. Catherine nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The moment we were alone in the desert, she whispered, when I realized I might die out there, all I could think about was how much I loved her, how I couldn't bear the thought of never seeing her smile again, never hearing her laugh. I was going to find work in Tucson, try to make an honest living somehow. I swear to you, Aiyana, I swear on my daughter's life. Morrison had been listening to this exchange with growing fury. Enough of this nonsense, he snarled, raising his gun. I'm taking what's mine, and if you get in my way, Indian, I'll put you in the ground. The threat hung in the desert air for exactly 3 seconds. Then several things happened at once. Shadow lunged forward with a snarl that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. 40 pounds of loyal fury aimed directly at Morrison's horse. The animal reared in terror, throwing its rider backward out of the saddle. Morrison's gun discharged harmlessly into the air as he hit the ground hard. The young rider, spooked by Shadow's attack, wheeled his horse around and spurred it into a panicked gallop, back toward the desert. Within moments he was nothing but a dust cloud on the horizon, which left only Nalnish, who sat calmly on his horse, making no move toward his weapon. Interesting, the Apache tracker said in their native tongue. The woman has found herself a protector. Aiyana kept his rifle trained on Morrison, who was groaning and trying to get back to his feet. You betrayed our people for gold, he replied. Why should I trust anything you say? Because, Nalnish said quietly, I have a daughter too, in the white man's school in Carlisle. They tell me she's learning to be civilized. His voice carried a bitterness that cut to the bone. Do you know what civilized means to them, Shadow Warrior? It means forgetting who you are. It means shame for the blood in your veins. Aiyana studied the other man's face, seeing something there he hadn't expected. Regret. I take their gold, Nalnish continued, because it pays for letters that tell me my little girl is still alive, still remembering the lullabies I sang to her. The white man's money buys me pieces of my daughter's heart. But this, he gestured toward Morrison, who was now standing unsteadily, rage and alcohol making his movements clumsy. This is different. How? Aiyana asked. Nalnish's answer came not in words, but in action. With a fluid motion, he drew his pistol and aimed it not at Aiyana, but at Robert Morrison. Because, he said in perfect English, any man who would hunt his own child like an animal deserves to meet the desert spirits he's so afraid of. Morrison's face went white. Now wait just a goddamn minute. I'm paying you good money to keep your blood money, Nalnish spat. Some things cannot be bought. The tableau held for a long moment, 2 Apache warriors, with guns trained on an abusive husband, while somewhere behind them a mother clutched her child and prayed for salvation that seemed to shift like desert sand. Then Morrison played his final desperate card. You kill me, he gasped, and they'll hunt you down like dogs. Both of you. I got friends, powerful friends. They'll burn every Apache camp from here to Mexico looking for the savages who murdered Robert Morrison. It was a threat with teeth, and they all knew it. The territorial government's relationship with the Apache was fragile at best. One dead white businessman could spark the kind of retaliation that would cost hundreds of lives, but it was Catherine who broke the silence, her voice carrying from the depths of the canyon like a ghost's whisper. "There's another way," she said. All three men turned toward the sound of her voice, though she remained hidden in the shadows. "Robert," she called out, her tone strangely calm now, "you want your money back. Take it." "Catherine, what are you doing?" Aiyana called back. "What I should have done from the beginning," came her reply, facing the truth. The sound of her footsteps on stone echoed through the canyon as she approached, Sarah still in her arms. When she emerged into the harsh desert sunlight, Aiyana's breath caught in his throat. She looked different somehow, not broken anymore but resolved. Dangerous in the way that only truly desperate people can be dangerous. In her free hand she carried a leather satchel. "Here's your money, Robert," she said, dropping the bag at Morrison's feet. "Every penny I took from you, but Sarah stays with me." Morrison's eyes went wide with greed as he snatched up the satchel, but his expression quickly twisted back into cruelty. "The hell she does. She's my daughter, my flesh and blood." "The law says—" "The law," Catherine interrupted, "says a lot of things about men who beat their wives and threaten to harm their children. The law also has opinions about men who gamble away their children's inheritance and then sell them to pay gambling debts." Morrison's face went ashy. "You don't know what you're talking about," but Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. "Don't I? Should I tell these gentlemen about the poker game in Tucson? About how you lost our house, our land, everything we own? About how you came home drunk and screaming about finding a way to pay back the men who were threatening to kill you?" "Shut up," Morrison snarled, but there was fear in his voice now. "About how you looked at our innocent baby daughter and said she was worth at least $1,000 to the right buyer." Catherine's voice rose, carrying across the desert like an indictment. "About how you held a gun to my head and told me I'd better find a way to make that sale happen, or you'd do it yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Nalnish slowly lowered his gun. "Shadow warrior," he said quietly, "I believe the woman has told us who the real thief is." Morrison lunged for Catherine with a roar of rage, but he never made it within 5 feet of her. Aiyana's rifle butt caught him in the temple, dropping him like a stone to the canyon floor. As the echoes of the confrontation faded, Sarah's cries seemed to fill the world, the sound of innocence calling out in a desert full of secrets, lies and desperate choices. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Catherine was smiling through her tears. "It's over, sweetheart," she whispered to her daughter. "Mama's going to keep you safe now. I promise." Yet as Aiyana looked at the unconscious Morrison, the conflicted tracker, and the woman holding her child like a shield against the world, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. In fact, the most shocking revelation was still to come. The desert sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold that reminded Aiyana of his grandmother's stories about the spirit world. Robert Morrison lay unconscious in the shade of the canyon wall, his breathing steady but labored. Catherine sat nearby, nursing Sarah with a tenderness that spoke of profound relief, while Shadow kept watch from his post at the canyon entrance. Nalnish had dismounted and was sharing water from Aiyana's spring, the two Apache men maintaining the careful silence of warriors reassessing old allegiances. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of years. "She is not his daughter," Nalnish said quietly in their native tongue, nodding toward the baby. Aiyana's hand stilled on his rifle. "What did you say?" "The child. I have been tracking them for 3 days. I heard things, saw things." Nalnish's weathered face was troubled. "Morrison speaks freely when he drinks. Too freely." Catherine looked up from nursing Sarah, her green eyes sharp with alarm. Though she couldn't understand Apache, something in their tone had caught her attention. "What things?" Aiyana press. Nalnish glanced at Catherine, then back to Aiyana. Morrison owes money to dangerous men in Tucson. More than $5,000. Men who kill to collect debts. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But he also owes something else. A debt of honor, he calls it, to someone who helped him when he was nothing. I don't understand. The woman, Nalnish said, his voice barely above a whisper. She was already with child when Morrison married her. The child's real father. He's been looking for them both. The words hit Aiyana like a physical blow. He turned to stare at Catherine, who was watching them with growing apprehension. How do you know this? Aiyana asked. Because, came a new voice from the canyon entrance. I've been looking for them too. Both Apache men spun toward the sound, weapons raised, but the figure who stepped into view held his hands up in a gesture of peace. He was a tall man, probably in his 30s, with sun-weathered skin and gentle brown eyes. His clothes marked him as a rancher, but there was something else about him, a quiet strength that reminded Aiyana of his own father. Shadow had not growled at this man's approach. That alone spoke volumes. My name is Daniel Hartwell, the stranger said, his gaze moving immediately to Catherine and the baby. I've been searching for you for 8 months, Catherine. Ever since you disappeared. Catherine went white as snow. Daniel. Oh God, Daniel, how did you find you? Daniel's voice was infinitely gentle. I never stopped looking. When Morrison told everyone you'd run away with another man, I knew it was a lie. I knew he'd done something to you. Sarah began to fuss in her mother's arms, and Daniel's entire expression transformed. The tough rancher facade melted away, revealing something raw and vulnerable. May I? He asked softly, extending his hands toward the baby. Catherine hesitated for only a moment, then placed Sarah in Daniel's arms. The change in the infant was immediate. She settled against him with the instinctive recognition that children have for those who belong to them. Hello, little star, Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Daddy's been looking for you. The truth hit Aiyana with devastating clarity. This was Sarah's real father. This man had been searching for his child for 8 months while Morrison hunted them like animals through the desert. I don't understand, Aiyana said. If you are father, why she marry Morris? Daniel's jaw tightened, but his arms remained gentle around his daughter. Because Robert Morrison is a convincing liar when he wants to be, and because Catherine was young and scared and alone. Daniel, please, Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. Not here. Not now. But Daniel's eyes were already on Morrison's unconscious form, and the rage there was barely contained. How long has he been hurting you, Catherine? How long has he been hurting our daughter? He never touched Sarah, Catherine said quickly. I made sure of that. But he was going to. That's why I ran. You should have come to me, Daniel said, his voice breaking. You should have trusted me. How could I? Catherine's voice rose with anguish. You were married, Daniel. You had a wife, a life, responsibilities. I couldn't destroy that for you. Nalnish had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. The debt of honor, he said to Aiyana in Apache. Morrison promised to take care of this man's woman and child in exchange for something. Money, probably, land. But he lied. Aiyana's head was spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying, Daniel answered in perfect Apache, startling both men, that Robert Morrison stole my family from me with lies and false promises, and then spent 8 months torturing them while I searched every territory from here to California. The fact that this white man spoke their language fluently was shocking enough, but the raw pain in his voice was something that transcended any language barrier. You speak Apache, Aiyana observed. My ranch borders Chiricahua land, Daniel explained, switching back to English. I've traded with your people for years. Some of my best friends are Apache. He looked pointedly at Nalnish, including a tracker named Nalnish, who I thought I could trust. Nalnish had the grace to look ashamed. Morrison paid well, he said quietly. I have a daughter to support. So do I, Daniel replied, his voice like steel. The difference is, I don't hunt children for money. Before the tension could escalate further, Morrison began to stir. His groan of pain echoed off the canyon walls as he struggled to sit up, one hand pressed to his bleeding head. "What the hell?" he began, then stopped short when he saw Daniel standing there, holding Sarah. "You. How did you find us?" "Same way you did," Daniel said calmly. "I hired a tracker. A better one than yours, apparently." Morrison's face cycled through several emotions: fear, rage, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate cunning. "Now you just wait one goddamn minute," he snarled, getting unsteadily to his feet. "That woman is my wife. That baby is legally mine. I don't care what lies she's been telling you." "Lies?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean like the lie you told me when you said Catherine had run off with a traveling salesman? Or the lie you told her when you said I was dead?" Catherine gasped. "What? He told you I was dead, didn't he?" Daniel's eyes never left Morrison's face. "Some story about a ranch accident. Made you believe there was no one left who cared about you, except him." Morrison's face was turning purple with rage and fear. "You can't prove any of that. It's her word against mine." "Actually," came yet another voice from the canyon entrance. "I think we can." This time all 5 adults turned toward the newcomer, a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. She was flanked by 2 younger men wearing territorial marshal badges. "Mrs. Aiyana Vasquez," the woman introduced herself, "territorial magistrate. And these are Deputy Marshals Rodriguez and Thompson." Morrison's face went ashen. What are you doing here?" "Following a very interesting trail of complaints, warrants, and missing person reports," Judge Vasquez replied calmly. "It seems Mr. Hartwell here has been quite persistent in his inquiries about a missing woman and child. Persistent enough to convince my office to investigate certain irregularities in your business dealings, Mr. Morrison." She produced a thick folder from her saddlebag. "Fraudulent marriage documents, forged letters, intimidation of witnesses, and that's before we get to the gambling debts and the rather disturbing reports from several Tucson establishments about your attempts to, shall we say, liquidate family assets." Morrison was backing toward the canyon wall, his eyes darting between the marshals and the growing crowd of people who had apparently been hunting him. "Now wait," he said desperately. "You don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. Catherine is my wife. She stole money from me. I was just trying to get my property back." Judge Vasquez opened her folder and withdrew a document. "This is the original marriage certificate from the San Antonio courthouse," she said. "The one you claimed was destroyed in a fire. Interesting how it survived, don't you think?" She handed it to Catherine, whose face went white as she read. "What does it say?" Aiyana asked. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. It's blank. The marriage was never legal. He forged everything." "Which means," Judge Vasquez continued, "that you, Miss Catherine Morgan, not Morrison, are a free woman, and your daughter belongs to whoever her natural father might be." Daniel stepped forward, still cradling Sarah. "That would be me, Your Honor, and I can prove it." But Morrison wasn't finished fighting. With a desperate roar, he lunged, not for his gun, but for a knife hidden in his boot. His target wasn't Daniel or the marshals, it was Catherine. "If I can't have you," he screamed, "no one can." What happened next would haunt Aiyana's dreams for the rest of his life. Shadow, who had been watching everything with the intense focus of a predator, launched himself at Morrison with a snarl that seemed to shake the very rock. But Morrison's desperation gave him strength and speed, and his knife was already descending toward Catherine's heart when Nalnish stepped between them. The blade meant for Catherine buried itself in the Apache tracker's chest instead, just below his heart. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain with something that might have been surprise, then up at Aiyana with eyes that held peace for the first time in years. "Now I have paid my debt," he whispered in Apache, My daughter will understand. He collapsed, pulling Morrison down with him in a tangle of limbs that ended with both men motionless on the canyon floor. The silence that followed was broken only by Sarah's confused whimpers and Catherine's sharp sobs of horror. Judge Vasquez knelt beside both men, checking for pulses. "Morrison's dead," she announced grimly. "Broke his neck in the fall. But this one," she looked up at Aiyana, "he's still alive. Barely." Aiyana was beside Nalish in an instant, cradling the other man's head while blood seeped between his fingers. "Why?" he asked, in their native tongue. "Why did you save her?" Nalish's smile was peaceful, almost serene. "Because she is a mother," he whispered. "And mothers are sacred." His eyes found Catherine, who was kneeling beside them despite her own injuries. "Take care of your little one," he told her in halting English. "Love her while you can." Then his gaze returned to Aiyana. "Tell my daughter, tell her I remembered who I was, at the end." Those were the last words Nalish ever spoke. As the desert wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sage and sorrow, Aiyana found himself holding the body of a man who had died to save strangers, a man who had found his honor again just in time to give his life for it. But even in the midst of grief, he could see that this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning of the most shocking truth of all. 3 days had passed since Morrison's death, and Nalish's sacrifice. The canyon that had witnessed so much violence now seemed peaceful, almost sacred, as if the desert itself was healing from the trauma. Judge Vasquez and the marshals had departed with Morrison's body and their official reports, leaving behind a legal document that declared Catherine Morgan a free woman and Sarah Hartwell the legitimate daughter of Daniel Hartwell. But as Aiyana watched Daniel with his daughter, he noticed something that made his trained eyes narrow with concern. The rancher's hands shook slightly when he held Sarah, and there was a pallor to his skin that had nothing to do with the desert sun. More troubling still, he'd begun coughing during the nights, soft, careful coughs, as if he were trying to hide them. Catherine had noticed too. Aiyana could see it in the way she watched Daniel when she thought no one was looking, in the extra tenderness she showed when speaking to him, in the shadow of fear that crossed her features whenever his cough grew worse. It was Shadow who finally forced the truth into the open. The loyal dog had taken to following Daniel everywhere, sitting beside him with the patient devotion that animals show when they sense something humans try to hide. On this particular morning, as Daniel attempted to saddle his horse for the journey to his ranch, Shadow suddenly pressed against the man's legs, whining softly. Daniel swayed on his feet, one hand gripping the saddle horn for support, while the other pressed against his chest. The coughing fit that followed was violent and prolonged, and when it finally subsided, there were specks of blood on his lips. "Daniel?" Catherine rushed to his side, baby Sarah balanced on her hip. "How long have you been hiding this?" "I'm fine," Daniel gasped, but even as he said it, his legs gave out. Only Aiyana's quick reflexes kept him from collapsing completely. "You are not fine," Aiyana said firmly, helping Daniel sit in the shade. "This sickness, how long you have it?" Daniel's resistance crumbled under their combined concern. His shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked older than his 30-some years. 6 months, he admitted quietly. "Maybe longer. The doctor in Tucson, he said it was consumption." The word hung in the desert air like a death sentence. Catherine's face went white, and she instinctively pulled Sarah closer to her chest. "Consumption," she whispered. "But that means that I'm dying, yes." Daniel's voice was steady, but his eyes were full of unshed tears as he looked at his daughter. "The doctor gave me maybe a year, maybe less, depending on—" He gestured vaguely at his chest. "No." Catherine's voice was fierce with denial. "No, we just found each other again. We just got our daughter back. This can't be happening." Daniel reached out to touch Sarah's tiny hand, and the baby immediately grasped his finger with the instinctive trust of a child for her father. "This is why I was so desperate to find you both," he said softly. "I knew I was running out of time. I couldn't die without knowing Sarah was safe, without telling you the truth about Morrison's lies." Aiyana studied the other man's face, seeing not self-pity but a kind of quiet courage. This was a man who had accepted his fate, but refused to let it defeat him. "Your ranch," Aiyana said. "What happens to it when I die?" Daniel finished. "I've been thinking about that. It should go to Sarah, of course. But she's just a baby. She'll need someone to care for her, to protect her until she's old enough to make her own decision." Catherine was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as she rocked Sarah gently. "I can't do this alone," she whispered. "I don't know how to run a ranch. I don't know anything about this country, about surviving out here." "You won't be alone," Daniel said, but there was uncertainty in his voice, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as her. Aiyana had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. The tragedy of it was almost overwhelming, a father who had searched desperately for his child, only to find her just in time to say goodbye. A mother who had fought so hard to keep her daughter safe, only to face the prospect of losing the one person who could help her provide a secure future. But as he watched shadow move protectively between Daniel and Catherine, as if the dog understood the magnitude of what was happening, an idea began to form in Aiyana's mind. It was crazy, unprecedented, and would require him to make choices that would change his life forever. "There is another way," he said quietly. Both Catherine and Daniel looked at him with desperate hope. "I know this land," Aiyana continued. "I know how to survive here, how to make it prosper. My grandfather's grandfather owned these mountains before the white man came. The spirits of my ancestors walk these canyons." "What are you saying?" Catherine asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew. "I am saying that I will help you, both of you. For as long as Daniel has left, I will be his partner, his brother. I will learn what he knows about ranching, about the white man's ways of working the land. And when the spirits call him home, I will stay. I will help you raise Sarah. I will protect her as if she were my own daughter." The silence that followed was profound. Even Sarah seemed to sense the weight of the moment, gurgling softly in her mother's arms, as if adding her voice to the conversation. Daniel was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "You would do that? For strangers? For people you barely know?" "You are not strangers," Aiyana replied. "We have bled together, fought together. Your daughter," he looked at Sarah, whose dark eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite her youth. "She is innocent. In Apache tradition, all children are sacred. We protect what is sacred." But Catherine was shaking her head, fresh tears flowing. "Aiyana, you don't understand what you're offering. You're talking about giving up your life, your freedom, your chance to have a family of your own. You'd be tied to us forever, to a white woman and her half-white child in a world that won't accept any of us. You think I have not considered this?" Aiyana's voice was gentle but firm. "You think I do not know what it means to walk between two worlds? I have watched my people forced onto reservations. I have seen the old ways dying, but here, in this place, I can honor both the ancient traditions and the new realities." He moved closer, his dark eyes intense with conviction. "Sarah is not just your daughter, Catherine. She is the future. Apache blood mixed with white blood, raised with love and respect for both heritages. She could be a bridge between our peoples. She could be hope." Daniel was staring at Aiyana, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You're not just offering to help us," he said slowly. "You're offering to become family." "Yes," Aiyana said simply, "if you will have me." But it was Catherine who voiced the concern that hung unspoken in the air. "And what about love, Aiyana? What about marriage, children of your own? You're a young man. You shouldn't have to sacrifice everything for us." For a long moment Aiyana said nothing. When he finally spoke, his words carried a truth that even he hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. "Who says I would be sacrificed?" he asked quietly, his eyes meeting Catherine's with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Perhaps the spirits brought us together for reasons we do not yet understand. Perhaps what looks like sacrifice is actually gift." The implications of his words settled over them like desert dusk. beautiful, transformative, and filled with possibilities that none of them had dared to imagine. Daniel coughed again, but this time he was smiling through it. An Apache warrior, a dying rancher, and a woman with a mysterious past, he said with weak humor. We're quite a family, aren't we? We are not family yet, Aiyana said carefully, but we could be, if we choose it, if we are brave enough to choose something the world has never seen before. Catherine looked down at Sarah, who was watching all of them, with those impossibly wise eyes. What do you think, little star? She whispered to her daughter. Should we trust this crazy Apache warrior who saved our lives? As if in response, Sarah reached out toward Aiyana, her tiny fingers opening and closing in the universal baby gesture for pick me up. When he took her in his arms, she settled against his chest with the same trust she had shown her father. I think, Daniel said softly, that she's already made her choice. But even as they sat there in the growing twilight, planning a future that defied every social convention of their time, none of them could have predicted the final twist that fate had in store, a revelation so shocking that it would test every bond they were trying to forge and force them to confront the ultimate meaning of family, love and sacrifice. Shadow, as if sensing the storm to come, moved closer to his pack, for that's what they had become. These unlikely souls, bound together by circumstance and choice. His amber eyes reflected the last light of day, holding secrets that only animals seem to understand about the true nature of human hearts. The most shocking truth of all was still waiting to be revealed, hidden in shadows darker than the desert night that was settling around them like a blanket woven from hope and fear in equal measure. 2 months had passed since that fateful night when 3 broken souls decided to forge an impossible family. Daniel's ranch, nestled in a valley where Apache land met territorial jurisdiction, had become a sanctuary where 2 worlds learned to coexist. The main house, built of adobe and timber, stood strong against the desert winds, while nearby, Aiyana had constructed a traditional Apache dwelling where he could commune with the spirits of his ancestors. But it was the small moments that told the real story of their transformation. Each morning, Daniel would teach Aiyana about cattle ranching, his voice growing weaker but his determination unwavering. The land speaks to those who listen, he would say, watching Aiyana's natural understanding of the animals and terrain. You already know its language better than I ever will. Catherine had thrown herself into learning everything she could about frontier life. Her soft hands, once suited only for fine needlework, had grown strong from milking cows and tending the vegetable garden. More remarkably, she had begun learning Apache customs from Aiyana, understanding that Sarah would need to know both sides of her heritage. And Sarah, beautiful, innocent Sarah, had become the heart that bound them all together. At 8 months old, she had her father's gentle brown eyes but her mother's determined spirit. She would laugh equally at Aiyana's Apache lullabies and Daniel's cowboy songs, as if she understood that love spoke all languages. It was on a crisp October morning that everything changed. Aiyana was teaching Sarah to walk in the courtyard between the house and the barn, her tiny hands gripping his fingers as she took wobbling steps on unsteady legs. Catherine was hanging laundry nearby, humming softly, while Daniel sat in his chair on the porch, wrapped in blankets despite the warm sun. His condition had worsened significantly in recent weeks, though he tried to hide it from the others. Shadow lay at Daniel's feet, the loyal dog having appointed himself as the dying man's constant guardian. It was Shadow who first sensed the approaching riders. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Company coming, Aiyana said, scooping Sarah into his arms as he scanned the horizon. 3 riders were approaching at a leisurely pace, their posture non-threatening, but purposeful. Catherine moved protectively closer to Aiyana and the baby, her hand instinctively going to the rifle they now kept, always within reach. Who are they? Daniel squinted through the morning light, then suddenly grew very still. Oh, God, he whispered, his voice barely audible. It's my brother. Your brother? Catherine's voice was sharp with surprise. In all their time together, Daniel had never mentioned having family. Thomas, Daniel confirmed, his face pale with something that looked like panic. He's He's supposed to be dead. The riders drew closer, and Aiyana could see them clearly now. The man in the center bore a striking resemblance to Daniel, though he appeared healthier and perhaps a few years younger. His companions looked like ranch hands, but their bearing suggested they were comfortable with violence if necessary. They stopped about 20 yards from the house, and the man who looked like Daniel dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. When he removed his hat, the family resemblance was unmistakable. "Hello, Danny," Thomas Hartwell said, his voice carrying across the courtyard with a mixture of affection and something darker. "You look surprised to see me." Daniel struggled to stand, Catherine immediately moving to help support him. "Tom, how?" "The mine collapse in Colorado. They said everyone was killed. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Thomas replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though it was convenient for a while. Amazing how many problems disappear when the world thinks you're dead." Aiyana stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between the newcomers and Catherine and Sarah. Something about Thomas Hartwell set his nerves on edge, the way he moved, the way his eyes kept calculating distances and positions, the way his men stayed mounted and ready. "What do you want, Tom?" Daniel asked, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. "Can't a man visit his brother?" Thomas's gaze moved past Daniel to Catherine and the baby. "And meet his new family, of course. Catherine, isn't it? And this must be little Sarah." The way he spoke Sarah's name made Catherine instinctively pull back, pressing closer to Aiyana. "How do you know who we are?" Thomas's smile widened. "I make it my business to know things, especially when they involve my brother and my inheritance." "Inheritance?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. "Come now, Danny. We both know you're dying. Consumption, isn't it? Tragic, really. But that means the Hartwell Ranch, our father's ranch, will need new management soon." Aiyana's hand moved to his knife. "Daniel already decide. Ranch belonged to Sarah when she grown." Thomas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Ah yes, the noble Apache guardian. How romantic. But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "You see, according to territorial law, when a man dies without a legal heir, his property reverts to his next living relative. Sarah is his legal heir," Catherine said fiercely. "We have the papers." "Sarah Hartwell," Thomas interrupted, "born to Catherine Morgan, an unmarried woman of questionable reputation, who was living under false pretenses as the wife of Robert Morrison." "Yes, I've done my research." He unfolded the document with theatrical precision. "According to this legal analysis, commissioned by myself through the territorial courts, Sarah's legitimacy is questionable, her parentage unproven, her claim to the Hartwell name and property legally insignificant." The words hit like physical blows. Catherine swayed on her feet, and Daniel's face went ashen with rage and fear. "That's impossible," Daniel gasped. "Judge Vasquez declared Sarah my legitimate daughter. The blood test, performed by a frontier doctor with no medical credentials and witnessed by an Apache and a woman with a criminal history," Thomas said dismissively, "hardly admissible in a real court of law." Aiyana stepped forward, his voice deadly calm. "What you want?" Thomas's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "I want what's rightfully mine. The ranch, the land, the cattle. Everything our father built and Danny has been playing house with." His eyes moved to Catherine and Sarah with unmistakable hunger. "Though I'm willing to negotiate for certain additional assets." The implication was crystal clear, and it ignited something primal in Aiyana's chest. But it was Daniel who found his voice first, struggling to his feet with more strength than he'd shown in weeks. "Get off my land," Daniel snarled. "Now." "Your land?" Thomas laughed. "Danny, you're dying. Your lungs are full of blood. Your strength is gone, and you're clinging to a fantasy of family with people who aren't even your race. This is business, not sentiment." He gestured to his men, and they began to dismount. "I'm prepared to be generous. Catherine and the baby can stay. Under my protection. The Apache can return to his people, or to the ground, if he prefers. And you, dear brother, can die in peace knowing your daughter will be well cared for. The threat was unmistakable. Thomas wasn't just claiming the ranch, he was claiming Catherine and Sarah as property. But he had made one crucial miscalculation. He had underestimated the bonds that had been forged in the desert, tested by violence and strengthened by love that transcended every boundary society had tried to create. Shadow's growl erupted into a full-throated snarl as the dog positioned himself protectively in front of Daniel. Catherine moved to stand beside Aiyana, her chin raised in defiance despite her fear. And Aiyana felt the warrior spirit of his ancestors flowing through his veins like liquid fire. "You want this ranch?" Aiyana said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly promise of a man who had nothing left to lose. "You fight for it." Thomas's smile faltered slightly as he realized that what he'd expected to be a simple intimidation had become something far more dangerous. "I was hoping to avoid unpleasant," Thomas said, his hand moving to his gun. "But if you insist on making this difficult, what happened next would be spoken of in whispers around Apache fires for generations to come." Aiyana moved like lightning, his knife flying from his hand to bury itself in the shoulder of Thomas's nearest gunman before anyone could even reach for their weapons. Shadow launched himself at Thomas's horse, panicking the animal and sending its rider sprawling to the ground. Catherine, moving with the desperate strength of a mother protecting her child, grabbed the rifle from beside the door and levered a round into the chamber. And Daniel, summoning reserves of strength that consumption hadn't yet claimed, stepped forward with his own gun drawn, his voice ringing across the courtyard with absolute authority. "This is my land, my family, and my choice," he declared. "Anyone who threatens them answers to me." In the stunned silence that followed, Thomas Hartwell found himself looking down the barrels of 3 weapons, held by people who clearly had nothing left to lose. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, a truth about Sarah's parentage that would make everything they thought they knew seem like shadows compared to the blazing reality that was about to shatter their world completely. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity suspended between heartbeats. Thomas Hartwell lay on the ground where Shadow had dumped him, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, while his wounded gunman clutched his shoulder, and the third man sat frozen on his horse, clearly reconsidering his employment choices. "You're making a mistake," Thomas snarled, spitting dust from his mouth. "All of you. I have the law on my side, and enough money to buy whatever justice I can't find naturally. Money cannot buy what matters most." Aiyana replied, his second knife now balanced perfectly in his throwing hand. "Honor, love, truth, truth." Thomas's laugh was bitter as he struggled to his feet. "You want truth? I'll give you truth, brother." His eyes locked on Daniel with poisonous satisfaction. "Tell them about Sarah's real father, Danny. Tell them why you were so desperate to claim her." Catherine's face went white. "What's he talking about?" Daniel's hands were shaking now, whether from his illness or from the weight of whatever secret Thomas was threatening to reveal. "Tom, don't. Please. Don't what? Don't tell them that you can't have children, that you've been sterile since that fever when we were boys." Thomas's voice rose with cruel triumph. "Don't tell them that Sarah can't possibly be your biological daughter because you're physically incapable of fathering children." The words hit like thunder in the desert stillness. Catherine's rifle wavered in her hands as she stared at Daniel in shock and confusion. That's impossible," she whispered. "The blood test, the way she looks at you. Blood tests can be faked," Thomas continued relentlessly, "and babies look adoringly at anyone who shows them kindness. But biology doesn't lie, Catherine. Danny has been lying to you for months." Aiyana watched Daniel's face crumble, seeing not deception but something far more heartbreaking, the desperate love of a man who had claimed a child as his own, not from selfishness, but from the pure desire to give her a name, a future, a father's protection. "Is it true?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper, Daniel's answer came in the form of a violent coughing fit that left him gasping and brought flecks of blood to his lips. When he could finally speak, his words were so quiet they were almost lost in the desert wind. "Yes," he admitted, "it's true. I can't have children. Never could." The rifle slipped from Catherine's nerveless fingers, clattering to the porch boards. Sarah, sensing the tension around her, began to cry soft, confused sounds that seemed to pierce everyone's heart. "Then who?" Catherine began, but couldn't finish the question. Thomas was enjoying their pain with visible satisfaction. "Well, well. It seems we have a mystery on our hands. An unmarried woman with a baby of unknown parentage. A dying man who's been playing father to a child who isn't his. And an Apache who's thrown his life away for a lie." But Aiyana was studying Catherine's face, seeing something there that the others had missed. The way her eyes kept darting to Sarah, then to him, then away again. The growing realization dawning in her features. The fear that was deeper than anything Thomas could threaten. "Catherine," Aiyana said gently, "what is it? What are you not telling us?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with the voice of a woman facing her deepest shame, she spoke the words that would shatter their world completely. "Sarah's father," she whispered, "was Apache." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Thomas's cruel smile faltered as the implications sank in. "What?" Daniel's voice was barely audible. "I was traveling with a supply wagon to the fort near the reservation," Catherine continued, tears streaming down her face. "We were attacked by raiders, not Apache, but white men pretending to be Apache to cover their crimes. I was hurt, left for dead." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "An Apache warrior found me. He saved my life, nursed me back to health, protected me for 2 weeks while I recovered. He was kind, gentle, nothing like the savage the settlers said he was, and I fell in love with him." Aiyana's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. There was something in Catherine's voice, in the way she couldn't meet his eyes, that made his soul recognize a truth his mind hadn't yet accepted. "His name," Catherine whispered, "was Nish. He who works. And when I left to return to the settlements, I didn't know I was carrying his child." The world tilted on its axis. Aiyana felt as if the ground beneath his feet had turned to quicksand, pulling him down into a reality too impossible to accept. "No," he breathed. "Nish was the tracker, the man who died saving you. He never said, because he never knew," Catherine sobbed. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was too ashamed to go back, too afraid of what people would say about a white woman carrying an Apache child. So I lied. I told everyone the baby's father was a white man who had died. And when Morrison offered to marry me and give the baby a name," she looked up at Aiyana with eyes full of anguish. "I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was giving her a chance at a normal life." Thomas was staring at all of them as if they'd lost their minds. "Wait, are you saying that baby is a half-breed? That changes everything. She has no legal rights at all. I can take her, sell her to whoever I want." He never finished the sentence. Aiyana moved with a speed and fury that seemed to channel every warrior who had ever walked these lands. His remaining knife found Thomas's throat before the man could even reach for his gun, the blade stopping just short of piercing skin. "You will not touch her," Aiyana snarled. "You will not speak of her. You will leave this place and never return, or I will send you to meet the spirits you have dishonored." But Thomas, even with a knife at his throat, wasn't finished with his cruelty. "You stupid savage," he gasped. "Don't you understand? That baby, she's not just any half-breed bastard. If her father really was Nish." His eyes gleamed with malicious knowledge. "Nish was the son of Chief Kachis's war leader. That makes your precious Sarah Apache royalty. And there are collectors back east who would pay a fortune for Chief Kachis's great-granddaughter." The horror of what he was suggesting, the idea of Sarah being sold as some kind of exotic curiosity to wealthy Eastern families, made Aiyana's vision go red with rage. His hand tightened on the knife, and for a moment it seemed certain that Thomas Hartwell would die in the dust of the ranch he'd tried to steal. But it was Daniel who stopped him. "Aiyana, no," the dying man said, his voice carrying a strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his failing body. "Don't let him make you into what he is." Aiyana's hand trembled on the knife, but gradually the red haze of fury cleared. He looked around at the scene, Catherine holding Sarah and sobbing, Daniel barely able to stand, Thomas bleeding and defeated, the two remaining gunmen looking ready to bolt at the first opportunity. And then, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, the most beautiful truth of all dawned on him. "It doesn't matter," he said quietly, stepping back from Thomas but keeping the knife ready. "Apache, white or both. Sarah's my daughter now, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the bonds that matter more than any law or custom." He looked at Catherine, seeing not shame but the desperate love of a mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her child. "And you," he said gently, "you are the woman I choose to love, to honor, to protect for whatever time we have left together." Daniel was smiling through his tears and his pain. "And you," he said to both of them, "are the family I choose to leave my legacy to, not because of blood or law or inheritance, but because you understand what it means to love something more than yourself." Thomas was looking at all of them as if they'd completely lost their minds. "This is insane," he sputtered. "You can't just decide to be a family. Society won't accept it. The law won't recognize it." "Then we make our own society," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Our own laws, our own truth." She looked at Aiyana with eyes that held no more secrets, no more shame, only love and hope and the courage to face whatever came next. "Will you have us? Knowing what we are, knowing what we'll face?" Aiyana's answer came in the form of action rather than words. He handed his knife to Daniel, then walked to Catherine and Sarah. Taking them both in his arms, he spoke in Apache words of bonding, of commitment, of promises that transcended every barrier society had ever created. Then he kissed Catherine, soft and gentle and full of a love that had been growing in his heart since the moment he'd first seen her dying in the dust. Sarah gurgled happily in her mother's arms, reaching up to touch Aiyana's face with tiny fingers that seemed to bless their union. Daniel was crying openly now, but his tears were tears of joy. "Nalnish would be proud," he whispered. "His daughter will be raised by the best man I've ever known." Thomas made one last desperate attempt to destroy their happiness. "This won't last," he snarled as he gathered his men to leave. "The world will tear you apart. Society will destroy you. And when it does, I'll be waiting to pick up the pieces." But his words fell on deaf ears. The family chosen, forged in fire, bound by love stronger than blood, had already stopped listening to the voice of hate and fear. As the three riders disappeared into the desert, leaving nothing but dust and empty threats, Aiyana held his new family close and felt the presence of the spirits around them. Nish's spirit, blessing the love that had saved his daughter, the spirits of his own ancestors, welcoming Catherine and Sarah into the eternal circle of Apache protection, and most powerfully of all, the spirit of love itself, which recognizes no boundaries and knows no limits. 3 months later, Daniel Hartwell died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the family he had chosen and who had chosen him in return. His last words were spoken to Sarah, who was taking her first steady steps across the porch of the ranch that would forever be her home. "Walk strong, little star," he whispered. "Walk proud. You carry the best of all worlds in your heart." And as Aiyana buried Daniel on the hill overlooking the valley, with Catherine beside him and Sarah in his arms, he knew that the most shocking truth of all wasn't about bloodlines or parentage or legal documents. It was about the miracle of love. Love that transforms strangers into family, enemies into allies, and broken hearts into something stronger than they ever could have been alone. Shadow howled his goodbye to the man who had earned his loyalty, and the sound echoed across the desert like a promise that some bonds can never be broken, some loves never forgotten, and some families last forever, not because they share the same blood, but because they choose to share the same heart. The desert wind carried their tears away, but it could not touch the love that would endure long after their footsteps had faded from the sand. In years to come, Sarah Hartwell would grow up knowing all her stories: the Apache warrior who found her mother dying in the dust, the dying rancher who claimed her as his daughter, the tracker who died to save strangers and never knew he was saving his own child, and the love that bound them all together in defiance of a world that said such love was impossible. She would walk strong, just as Daniel had asked, and she would walk proud, carrying the legacy of 4 parents who had loved her beyond measure and beyond reason. But most of all, she would walk forward into a future bright with the promise that love, real love, always finds a way.